Good evening and welcome to a very special interview show of the Prode. It has been more than 3 years since the war in Ukraine began, and conflict continues to bring devastating civilian casualties and a deepening humanitarian crisis. Tonight, we focus on the extraordinary challenges faced by journalists and civilians in Ukraine due to the ongoing crisis. Joining me to discuss this is Ms. Dinara Khalilova, editor of the independent media outlet POMIZH, which covers the crisis in Ukraine. She has also previously worked with the Kyiv Independent. Thank you so much, Dinara, for your time and a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I would like to begin the discussion by asking that how have the combined pressures of physical danger, infrastructure destruction, and restricted access to resources such as power, internet, transportation reshaped the operational strategies of journalists, and what adaptive frameworks have emerged to sustain reporting in Ukraine?
Oh, that's a that's a big question to answer. I would say at first that like some Ukrainian journalists have already had some experience reporting on the war like before 2022, because Russian war against Ukraine started in 2014. But of course, like the majority of journalists had this experience for the first time, and of course it changes the whole process. It just turns it upside down, and it's really it became a big challenge for a lot of journalists in Ukraine. Of course, first in terms of physical danger, and mostly for those, of course, who are working on the front lines and in the cities near to the front line, but also for other journalists who are based in other cities further from the front line, because of course, a lot of journalists go to the sites of Russian attacks after it happens to report on the aftermath. And Russia has a practice of conducting double tap attacks, so targeting these areas again in some time after the first attack. And of course, the first responders, they come under immense danger, such as rescuers, police, and journalists as well. So the physical danger, of course, has increased throughout all the country. I would say also this is like this is having a huge toll on the mental health, of course, not only of journalists, like the whole population, but journalists in particular, because of um, all the information that they kind of like pass through them, and all the news that they're covering. It's extremely upsetting, of course. It's also a war in their own country, so it affects their loved ones, their friends, their relatives, and themselves, of course. And that's a huge problem in Ukraine, like this state of total burnt out and just like really deteriorated mental health, which of course complicates their work as well. And not everybody can like go on for such a long time covering on a full-scale war, like for over 3 years non-stop. And also, of course, as you mentioned, there is this problem with limited access to information, and of course it would be true for any country in war, because of martial law and the limitations it puts on the access to information. And it makes the work of journalists really, really challenging, because it's really hard to determine like what claims from the authorities are credible, and how like you can't really verify them with this limited access to information. So of course you can like say that the government claims this, but we haven't been able to verify it. But of course, like, it's the job of journalists to go further and to try to verify it and to actually understand what's going on. But it's been extremely challenging, and I've also faced a lot of challenges with this in my work, because also during the war there is lots of misinformation from both sides, because it's just a part of warfare. It's a normal part of fighting. And it's also another question of like having a huge responsibility to not do any harm in your work to either our military or civilians, because if you disclose like any sensitive information, it can be used against the military, or it may be used to, for example, prosecute civilians on the occupied territories. So it's all like a very complex issue, I would say. And of course, it's having a lot of it's posing a lot of challenges to Ukrainian journalists, and actually a lot of organizations now, media organizations, are focused on helping journalists to overcome these challenges, to giving some like education for them on these matters, or like teaching them how to survive in challenging circumstances on the front lines and so on.
Yeah, so what areas in Ukraine war are you covering in specific, and what has been your key takeaways as a journalist by covering those areas?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, like in the first days, I started working as a local producer for Sky News, actually in Ukraine. So I was like more like helping them to cover the events in different cities, and like moving constantly and like showing the immediate kind of like consequences of the invasion. So it was also like focused on mostly the effect of the war on civilians. And when I started working in the Kyiv Independent in September 2022, I was first focused on the breaking news. So I was working on the news desk. So it also like basically implied that I was covering all the most important events going on in the country, and of course. They're like mostly involving the hostilities and the impact on civilians and the politics around it. And then I was working as like a reporter, kind of like a long form reporter. And I was mostly focused on also like social cultural impact of the war on the population, and also the main kind of developments of the conflict. For example, I covered uh, the this um, blocking of the border between Ukraine and Poland by Polish truckers a lot. I also covered the delay in the US aid to Ukraine, in the US military aid that was going on for over 6 months. Um, I was also covering mm, a lot of news on the prosecution of Ukrainian civilians in the occupied territories, and that's actually what I'm focusing more and more in my work on, covering what's really going on in the occupied territories and what the Russian occupation actually looks like, and what dangers it poses to Ukrainian civilians. And it's an endless list of how much their rights are violated, and what kind of nightmare they live in. And I think that's the really an undercover topic because of how difficult it is to obtain any information from the occupied territories, and how difficult it is to get somebody on the ground to talk to you, because of course they're really scared. And that's actually the topic that I would really like to focus on also in the nearest future. And I'm working on some stuff on this topic now. And I think it's really, really important to cover it, especially now when we have all this news about the potential peace negotiations and peace deal, and all this kind of, like the narrative of Ukraine having to give away part of its territory to, like, in exchange for peace. And I think it's really important to continue showing the world that it's not just land we're talking about, it's the actual people who are just going through the nightmares of the Russian occupation. And it's not just, the government just changed and everything is fine and the life is just continuous. That's not like it. And these people deserve to be taken into account, and they deserve to be liberated from this horrible occupation.
Yeah, so how can you evaluate the support that you get from Ukrainian government, if any, and how has been your government responding to protecting the lives of journalists specifically, and what support mechanism does the government have for journalists covering the war?
Um, that's also a complex issue because I was also going to talk about it a little bit today with you in terms of like challenges. I would say that um, um, it's really hard to generalize, because there are some parts of the Ukrainian government that are really helpful, and they're trying to to have this like honest and effective discussion with journalists, and they understand the real role of journalists, and how the government should like interact with them. But there is another part of the Ukrainian government that I think still believes that journalists are like instruments for them to gain their own get their own benefits in like political perspective, and they want to have some control over the media. And of course, it mostly concerns the independent media in Ukraine, and there have been some cases of pressure from the government linked agents, I would say. It's hard to like talk about it because it's not like yet proved in any way, but um, journalists have really faced this problem, and of course it's not helping their work in any way, and it's hindering their work, and it's really it's really not good when there is this huge danger posed by Russia to journalists, and like the Ukrainian government is also creating some new problems on top of that, when they should be really, really supportive of Ukrainian journalists, because they are showing the truth of the war. So of course we have some support from some representatives of the government, and we have kind of like attention from other parts of the government. And I would say that there is also a lot of support from international media organizations as well. And I mean, without this support, a lot of media would not be able to survive. And for example, we remember this halt of the USAID, like the organization USAID. Uh, Actually, not a lot of people know this, but many Ukrainian media organizations were receiving grants from this organization, and this really good independent media organizations that have not been able to be sustainable without this money. And of course, it's a whole other topic, but it's really hard for independent media in Ukraine to survive, considering all the economic aspects and the fact that the audience is not financially capable to pay for media content. So we really need this support from international media organization and international organizations as well. And like we have it now. Of course, like the government could be more supportive, I would say, but of course, some people in the government they really understand the importance of the job of Ukrainian journalists, and the importance of having this, like local perspective. So we can't just have only foreign journalists reporting on the war in Ukraine, because we have to have our own voice, and that's exactly what Ukrainian journalists are doing, and they are more in the context. I think actually we should amplify the voices of Ukrainian journalists more, and that's what I'm also like trying to do in my work, to amplify Ukrainian voices.
Yeah, so you talked about misinformation in the beginning. So my question is around that in an environment marked by disinformation campaigns and propaganda from multiple actors, what innovative methods can journalists employ to verify information and maintain public trust? And how do civilians exactly navigate this distorted information landscape to make critical decisions about their safety, survival, and about the updates of the war?
Um, I would say that, but as for journalists, we just have to be really more careful with what sources we trust and what we can actually report on. And maybe we should, like in a lot of cases, we choose to wait a little bit more to verify the information, to avoid any like to avoid publishing any fakes, because that's really has been a case for a lot of journalists to to almost making those mistakes of believing something right away. And because it's, for example, a huge deal, like a military official has been fired, or like a huge attack happened and something was like damaged or destroyed. But we always remind ourselves that we should be very careful with this. And we kind of like, throughout the war, we kind of already developed for ourselves a list of like more credible sources, and of course we always try to go to like the first, to the actual source of the information, not just, like republishing all the stuff that was already published before. And that's just, yeah, that's just, like the issue of taking more time and being more and more considerate of this. But of course, sometimes like mistakes are just unavoidable, because sometimes, for example, official sources share some false information because they made this mistake, and because we kind of already like used to using official sources, and we like have a habit of like believing them. Sometimes they also make mistakes, and we like share this information and it's been fake and we have to apologize. So it's just, we just have to be really, really careful. But of course, sometimes mistakes are unavoidable, and we just, I think for journalists, it's just really important to be transparent about it, and to honestly tell their audience that we made a mistake. It was not true. It was a false information. We apologize. We will be more careful in the future, and so on. So I think that's just the realities of a war, and it's just a huge challenge. Um, and in terms of the audience, of course, there's a lot of Russian misinformation, and Russia spends a huge amount of money on disinformation and on spreading fakes, and on spreading some narratives that are more useful for them. And sometimes it's not even just spreading fakes, but just oversaturating the information space with so much different and contrasting narratives that the audience just gets overwhelmed and doesn't know who to believe. And of course, it's really, I think, a huge issue and a big challenge for the government, and also for non-governmental sector to ramp up their efforts on like media education. I think media education should be really just prevalent in schools and universities, just like in the media everywhere. We should teach the audience how to be critical, and how to understand whether the source is credible, whether you should believe it or you should like double check. So there's a lot of problems with this, and we've noticed a lot of times that the audience believes something that's not entirely true or not true at all, and then the government has to debunk it again and again. So it's just, like Russia has so many resources to do this, and it's just Ukraine can't, can't spend so much money to deal with this disinformation campaigns. And yeah, I guess it's just like a very complex issue of all of us just trying to combat these narratives, and to educate the general population on the critical thinking skills.
Yeah, now coming to the humanitarian crisis. So, given the escalating humanitarian crisis, displacement, food insecurity, limited medical access, how can journalists also balance the ethical imperative to expose civilian suffering with the risk of amplifying trauma or endangering vulnerable populations? And what role do civilians also play in shaping this narrative? So, how you can maintain a balance between that you are also showing the truth of the war, and you're also showing the, I mean, you're also not you're also not demotivating your population in terms of, if a lot of civilian casualties have happened in an area and you are showing the reality. So on one hand, it's good, it's ethical as a journalist to show that, but on the other hand, many people can also get traumatized by those.
Yeah, it's actually a huge issue now, and it's we've been having a lot of discussions about it in Ukraine recently. And basically, every time there is a huge attack and there are lots of casualties, and there are these photos of like injured people or killed people spreading across the online platforms, every time there is this discussion on like whether it's ethical to share this and whether it's ethical to amplify these messages and this traumatizing content. And I think there is no like one definite answer to this question. Um, but I think it's really important, as you said, like to maintain this balance um, between sharing the truth and keeping Ukraine in the spotlight and keeping the news about Ukraine like constantly in the news cycle, because like otherwise people would just forget. Those people who don't like have any links with Ukraine, they just care about Ukraine when they see it on the news. And of course, we need to continue doing this, and we need to continue um, uh, showing that the war is not over and it's still horrible and there are still victims, there are still casualties, there are still ruined lives. Mm, at the same time, I think there are some limits as what you can show in terms of like for this content to be effective, but also ethical. And I think it's always really important um, to try to do everything not to harm this person, for example, in the photo or in the video that you are showing, and for example, not share any information about like a killed person that can be identified before you're sure that their relatives know about this person that was killed. So it's just, it's always this issue of not doing any harm, but also covering this in an effective way. And of course, we know that um, you have to like show emotions, and um, you have to make the audience feel something. And of course, when you're showing this like horrible images, it instantly gives some kind of like emotions to the audience. But at the same time, I think it often, if you do it too much, it desensitizes the sorry desensitizes the audience. So like the audience just gets overwhelmed with this and just chooses not to pay attention anymore and just like closes their like phone or laptops and go on because it's like too much. So I think it's just also like always this issue of finding a balance, and always keeping in mind that you first and foremost should remain a human. And like, of course you're a journalist, but first and foremost you're a human, and you just should try to avoid doing any harm to anybody with your work. And I think that's the most important thing that goes above everything else.
Now coming to the gaps and how we can work towards bettering those. So what are the key gaps in international policy and aid frameworks that fail to adequately protect journalists and civilians in Ukraine, and how might coordinated global efforts better address issues like safety of journalists, safety of civilians, safety of people who are working on the front line, and basic access to humanitarian relief?
um hmm. That's also a complicated question because of course, like international organizations um, should try to help uh, to ensure security of the civilians on the front lines and journalists as well. But in the areas where there is active fighting, it's really hard to do this. And I mean, even like for the military, um, they may like unintentionally do something that would also then like cause harm to the civilians. I mean, like Ukrainian military, and it just, it's really hard to navigate through these challenges, like in the area of actual fighting. And I think first and foremost, it should be about evacuation and timely evacuation of civilians. We actually have a big problem with it in terms of like persuading civilians to leave, because a lot of civilians, those who are left, they're mostly like elderly people or people with some disabilities, and it's really hard for volunteers and humanitarian workers to persuade them to actually leave. And I think it's connected to the lack of the government support for internally displaced people. So I think it would be like one of the main issues to improve for the Ukrainian government is to improve the system of support for internally displaced people, because those people who don't want to leave, they don't want to leave because they don't believe they would get the support they need if they leave. And it's just like it's their home, they know everything in their areas, they already have a life there, and it's really hard, especially for elderly people, just to like in 1 second just to leave and build your life from scratch in some other city, not only for elderly, for any person. So I think that's the main kind of like goal for the Ukrainian government. And of course with this our foreign partners can help. I think they can help in terms of like financial support for the internally displaced people, and also just to build this system of effective assistance and effective communication with internally displaced people. Maybe they can share their own experiences to the Ukrainian government and help them to make it more systemic, I would say. And on the front lines, it's also always an issue that Russia continues targeting journalists on the front lines. It specifically targets journalists because Russia doesn't want the world to know what's really going on. And I mean, there have been a lot of cases when journalists have been attacked. Those who are working on the front lines by drones, and it's really a big issue. And some of them died, some of them were injured, and of course, and also another important thing to say, that we have also a pattern of Russian troops attacking hotels in frontline cities that they know that there are lots of international journalists staying in these hotels. Actually, one of the human rights organizations, Truth Hounds in Ukraine, they recently made a report on Russian attacks on hotels, specifically to target journalists and humanitarian workers. So we already know it's a pattern. And of course, when other journalists see this, they are discouraged from coming to Ukraine and covering the war. And of course, that could lead to what Russia wants, to the silence and to the absence of coverage. And when, in terms of like Russia doing this, and it's an obviously a crime, I'm not sure that international organizations or foreign governments can do something about it, because as we already see, Russia doesn't care about any norms of international law and rules of war. It just does what it wants, and I think it's not facing enough pressure, and I think nobody has put enough pressure on Russia to stop doing this yet. I don't know. I just unfortunately I lost hope in this, but I hope that maybe in some further future something could change in this. It's just, like, I don't believe that Russia is interested in changing this. But it's a big problem and it needs to be addressed. I'm just like not sure how exactly. Yeah, but that's like the biggest problems that journalists are facing now.
Yeah.
reporting on the field.
I would like to conclude the discussion by asking that what message do you have for the international community in order to help the journalists working on the front line, and what message do you have for people from people who have different nationalities than Ukraine, and how can they show their support towards the Ukrainian cause?
I would say that the most important thing that people abroad can do now for Ukrainian journalists is to actually pay attention to their work and to amplify their voices. So to become a member, for example, of the Kyiv Independent, that is mostly funded by the readers, and it relies on the members and donations. Then to share and repost and comment and like interact with the content of all these Ukrainian media that are actually often also um, doing content in English. So a lot of Ukrainian media now started covering the war in English as well. So you can have some research and find some really good and high quality Ukrainian media sources that are covering Ukraine in the English language. Also, you can give a platform for Ukrainian journalists to speak abroad. You can help to organize events that are connected to Ukraine and that are promoting Ukrainian cause and that are spreading the knowledge about Ukraine. And also, if we are talking just in general, not only about journalists, I would say that to everybody that like please just don't forget about Ukraine. The war is still going on. And the full-scale invasion has been happening for over 3 years, but the war actually started in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Donbass. And it's not just a Ukrainian issue. It's much bigger than that. And I just want to say that like most people in Ukraine, we are confident that if Russia wins and Ukraine is lost, Ukraine would not be the end of this. Russia will go further, and it poses a great danger to Europe, not only to Europe. And it's just in your own interest to pay attention and to educate yourself on what's going on and on the roots of the war, because it's not about NATO, it's not about all this. It's just Russian propaganda narratives. So please educate yourself. Please amplify Ukrainian voices, and please try to help those directly affected by the war, because it's just an issue of humanity, and it's just an issue of being okay or not okay with the fact that there is a full-blown war and genocide happening in the middle of Europe, and it's still going on, and it doesn't have any end in sight.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dinara, for your time. Really appreciate the hard work which all the journalists working on the front line in Ukraine and anywhere elsewhere in the world are doing in order to, do justice to their role. Once again, many thanks for joining, and really hope the situation gets better soon.
Thank you for having me. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you.